Good afternoon, everybody. I am Marianne Lax, and I am the Senior Manager of Education and Enrichment here at the Maltz Museum. And I want to thank you for joining us today at the Maltz Museum for our afternoon program of Paris, Auschwitz, Remembering the Children with Eleanor Winter. This is also the name of Eleanor's new book. She'll be talking a little bit more about that later on in the program. So just before we get to that, I'd like to remind everybody that we have a new exhibit, The Girl in the Diary, Searching for Rivka from the Łódź Ghetto, which helps us to look to history to understand our present and consider our role in creating a better future. The story of Girl in the Diary has never felt more urgent, and the exhibit will be at the museum through April, and we hope you will consider a trip to explore this eloquent and well-done exhibit that originated at the Galicia Museum in Poland. Also, please visit our website, maltzmuseum.org, for a complete listing of our upcoming winter programs. Now, getting to our presenter, Eleanor Winters. Other than being a lovely, gracious human being and a pleasure to work with, Eleanor is a New Yorker and Paris-based is a New York and Paris-based calligraphic artist. She has been working on a large ongoing series of calligraphic. Am I saying that correctly? No,
Calligraphic. Pretty close.
calligraphic. Thank you. Paintings in commemoration of nearly 7,000 Parisian Jewish children who perished in the Nazi concentration camps during the Holocaust. Eleanor has been an active participant in the international calligraphy movement for more than 40 years. A commercial as well as fine art calligrapher, she is the author of 6 books, and exhibits of her paintings were hosted by the Anne Frank Center, the Holocaust Memorial Center, and the Rothschild Rashi Jewish Cultural Center in Paris, and also an online solo exhibition hosted by the Art of Letters in Singapore. So I'm going to turn this over to Eleanor, who will share the story of how we got to Paris, Auschwitz, remembering the children. And take it away, Eleanor. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Marianne. Thank you for the nice introduction. And I'd also like to thank the Maltz Museum for inviting me to speak to all of you. And welcome to all of you who are joining us here today. I'm talking to you from Paris, so today for you is this evening for me, but it's still relatively early here. It's just after 7 in the evening in Paris. As Marianne told you, I've been working on this project for quite a while. I don't think she gave you the amount of time, but I started this in 2010, and it's been ongoing, on and off a little bit, mostly on. So over these 12 or 13 years, I have made more than 200 paintings, all based on one tragic chapter in French history, one, I wouldn't call it a footnote, but one story that is part of Holocaust history. The purpose of the project, as Marianne just explained very, very clearly, is the commemoration of nearly 7,000 Parisian children, Parisian Jewish children, who died in the Nazi concentration camps during the Holocaust. I would like to give you a little bit of history. I would like to put this project into a larger context. And I'm going to read you some numbers because these are statistics. So these are numbers that come from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. At the start of World War II in 1939, 1.6 million Jewish children lived in Europe. When the war ended in 1945, between 1 million and 1.5 million were dead. In France, specifically, before World War II, there were 320,000 Jews, 200,000 of which lived in Paris, and 30,000 Jewish children living in Paris. Between 1942 and 1944, 76,000 Jews were deported from France, including 11,400 children. 2,000 of these children were under the age of 6. 2,000 of the Jews who were deported from France survived. And of the 11,400 children deported from France, 200 survived. These are shocking numbers. These are overwhelming numbers. The project that I'm working on, my painting project, is about memory. It's about what we remember. It's about how we keep memory alive. The expression art in the service of memory describes the purpose of what I'm doing, by which I mean that I am using my own art to keep a memory alive. I believe in a way that may be more immediate, more emotionally available, more visceral for some people than reading it. I think when you see images, when you see films, when you see theater, it comes home to you even more. We call this art in the service of memory. Elie Wiesel, writer, political activist, Holocaust survivor, won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1986. He died in 2016, but he received the prize in 1986. And this is a short two sentences that were part of his speech. I have tried to keep memory alive. I have tried to fight those who would forget, because if we forget, we are guilty, we are accomplices. I'm going to share my screen now and show you some of the work that I've done with this theme, with this purpose in mind. And one of the things that I will be doing, which you may or may not be expecting, is I'm going to talk about the text that I'm writing, and as a calligrapher, I'm writing words, and also about the art, how I made the art. So for those of you who are interested in the creative process, I'm going to give you some of that, what kind of materials I used, what my process was. So let's look at the screen share. And this is the title of our exhibition. My exhibition. This was the title of my exhibitions, and it's the title of our lecture, Paris, Auschwitz, Remembering the Children. The subtitle here, À la mémoire des enfants déportés, means in memory of the deported children. Now, why am I using French in my title? Well, obviously it's about France, it's about Paris, and it's about specifically about memorial plaques that have been installed on the front of school buildings all over the city of Paris in memory of the deported and the assassinated children. So the project began with me reading the words. So here's a picture of a school building in Paris. This is not very easy to read, but I'm going to show you this plaque bigger in a moment. So this is how these plaques appear outside of hundreds of schools inside the city of Paris. And this is what they say. This is one of the plaques. It says, I'm going to translate. I'll be showing you quite a bit of French, which I will translate as we go along. In memory of the students of this school deported between 1942 and 1944 because they were born Jewish, innocent victims of the Nazi barbarity and the government of Vichy. More than 1,200 children from the 11th district, the 11th arrondissement. Paris is divided into 20 districts. So the 11th district were exterminated in the death camps. And the last line here, nous les oublions jamais, we must never forget them. We must never forget them. Many of the plaques have other words, and some start differently, some have different numbers. Each arrondissement, each district had a different number of children who were deported. Many of them start with the words à la mémoire, and some des enfants, some des élèves. Élèves is students. So here is one that says, this is from the 20th district, in memory of the children, students from this school, etc., innocent victims. And here is something very significant. It says, with the active complicity, the active collaboration of the government of Vichy. And this is something that I am going to talk about a little bit more. So there are other plaques that say, in memory of the little children from this preschool. There are plaques that say, in memory of the students from a particular school, a neighborhood, a building, a house, and they all are talking about the deported children. So the words are shocking. I've been reading these words as I walk through Paris. I've been living there since 2002, so it's been 20 years that I've been reading these words. I stop in front of schools and I look at them, and my reaction is always emotional. And I feel that as a calligrapher, I can express my reaction. I can express my own emotions through my art. And I would say that as this project developed, it became more important for me to do that. It became something that wasn't just writing words, but something that was necessary for me, for what I was feeling and what I want other people to feel. I'd like to tell you how these plaques got here, why they were installed in front of the schools. First of all, a little bit of history, post-Holocaust, but still quite old. Francois Mitterrand, who was the president of France between 1981 and 1995, was also implicated in the history of Vichy. He worked for the Vichy regime, which was the German-controlled government of France in the south of France during the war. Mitterrand stated that the French Republic had nothing to apologize for, that it was the fault of Vichy. He separated himself from Vichy and said it was their fault. In fact, here's another bit of interesting, kind of shocking history. It wasn't until 2005, which is 60 years after the end of World War II, that the French Ministry of Education issued a decree requiring the teaching of the history of the Vichy regime in secondary schools in France, 60 years after the war. When Jacques Chirac became president of France in 1995, he issued an apology to the Jews on behalf of France. This was also an acknowledgement of the responsibility of the French government. He actually admitted to the complicity, the active complicity of the government of Vichy and the French police in the deportation of not just the children, but the Jews from France. Just a little more about the plaques, and then I will show you some artwork. So shortly after this historic speech by Chirac, an organization was established in the 20th arrondissement, which is this one that this plaque represents, called the Association for the Memory of the Deported Jewish Children. And that association enabled the placement of the first plaque in Paris in one of the primary schools in the 20th arrondissement. And subsequently, within the next couple of years, those organizations that was for that district, they opened up in every part of Paris and elsewhere in France as well. And in fact, a national council was established for the memory of the children. There are now, from my count, from my research, there are now 400 of these plaques in Paris. So as a calligrapher, as a walker in Paris, I started to copy the words, and I thought I would try to write them in calligraphy. So I'm going to show you the first couple of trials that I had with the words. And this may not have been the first. This is one of the first. So how did I start? I started by writing it in a style that I use frequently as a calligrapher. This is italic. It's used for invitations. It's used for envelopes. And I just started with what I knew. So I use, not just what I knew, but what I use all the time. So this is the same text in memory of the children. Actually, it's a different one. It's the children, the women, and the men of the 20th arrondissement, the 20th district, who were deported and assassinated in Auschwitz. So I wrote it pretty straightforward. I added a little bit of decoration. I decided to drip some water on it to obliterate a bit of it, to try to express something. And then I tried again and I obliterated more. I did another piece and I dropped wet ink on it. And then I did another piece. I'm showing you the rejects now. So I want you to understand these are the ones that are not good. Just the first few. And then it got more illegible. And finally, I reached a point where you could no longer read what I was writing. And at this point, all of these pieces, by the way, measure about 8 by 10 inches. They were fairly small. I tried using different media, paint, ink. I washed, I spilled water on it. I can barely read over here, à la mémoire. I guess I can read it because I know what it says. But these were not expressing what I wanted for these words. So I realized that I had to change directions. And shortly thereafter, these pieces were done fairly quickly in 2010, and then I moved on. And here is what I would say is the first piece I was happy with, the first painting, where I can read the words, where the calligraphy is selected because of the letters. These are Gothic letters, which I'm sure many of you know are associated with Germany. Medieval manuscripts, German and Northern European manuscripts, and also specifically with Hitler, because during the Hitler years, he required books to be printed in Gothic typography. So using Gothic calligraphy for me was right for a start my project. And I used fairly demanding colors, a bright red, black background, and white shadow of the letters. This is exactly the text I read in the beginning about the 1,200 children from the 11th district who were exterminés, you see, exterminated. Here it says, Les camps de la mort, the death camps. I did the same piece again with the same words, entirely different concept. I left a large blue background, as you can see, and I made it a little less legible, but I think you can still, or I can still pick out the significant words. Here's deported. Here are the years, again, à la mémoire. And here are the camps. You can see the camps and the 1,200 children. And from there, this was a larger piece. This one measures around 13 inches by 20 inches, which is fairly large. These are all works on paper. I have to mention that. I mostly used watercolor paper, which is heavy, and I can use various kinds of media on the paper, inks, paints, sometimes acrylic, sometimes watercolor, and the paper holds up. It's a strong paper. So I started doing some variations on the kind of color I used, the kind of calligraphy I used. This again is about à la memoire. You can see this one is for students from this high school, this lycée, but again, the same story. Né juif, born Jewish, innocent victims. And in this case, this was from the second district of Paris. And I tried using a different kind of background. I think I put the background on first with a sponge, putting red and gold paint on the white watercolor paper. Again, another one with similar colors, also with a background sponged on. This is one that I feel is successful in terms of the message, because to me, and also people have who've seen this in shows have commented that it looks like a storm. It looks like the black clouds of a trouble. You know, it's a stormy background. And I also wrote bigger, and I decided to write some of the most important words bigger. So à la mémoire, in memory, deported, the dates, Jewish, juif, Jewish, innocent, Nazi barbarity, complicity, and the government of Vichy. This is actually a fairly small painting. It measures, I believe, around 9 by 12, but it looks very big because of the size of the writing filling the space almost to the edges. I tried, as I developed this project, these are works from 2012, 2013. My goal was to try to interpret the words with the style of calligraphy, with the color, with the size, with the texture. Here is a different story. This is about a different story. It's a different memorial plaque about young Jewish women, girls, not women, girls from 13 to 18 years old who were at a fashion school. They were studying to be fashion designers, and they were arrested and taken from their school. And you can see arrested. And again, this was in 1944. The Nazi barbarity, deported to Auschwitz, exterminated. And here, n'oublie pas, which is another way of saying ne les oublions pas, never, you should never forget. You should never forget. And here is a piece I'd like to just tell you briefly how this one came about. This is a different text. This one starts with the word arrested by the police of Vichy. And here, the word here, which is a little hard to read, is complice, in complicity with the Nazi occupation. And what happened, I'll tell you this little story, because this is something about how art happens, I would say. This was a piece that I worked on and off over days, weeks, perhaps. And I wrote first in thin black letters. You can see it underneath, just capital letters. And then I put a background in, and then I wrote in big red paint in Gothic, this part here. And then I wrote on top of it. I added paint. I added more color, speckles of red. And at a certain point, it was a big mess, I will say. What you're looking at is not the final piece. Before the final piece, it was layers of color and ink and paint, and I could no longer work with it. It wasn't working. So I told my husband, who is an artist, I said, I'm throwing this one away. And he said, no, don't throw it away. Why don't you just wash it off and see what happens if you wash the top layer off, and then when it dries, you can write on it again. So I thought, well, I have nothing to lose. I'll just try that. So I put it in the kitchen sink, and I scrubbed it. And when it dried, this is what was left. So I took his advice and I washed it, but I did not write on it again. I left it as is, because I felt that there was something very powerful about the way these words disappear into the background. I feel as if it's like writing on an old wall, and I kept this piece as part of my exhibition. Another one where I did something a little bit experimental. Most of these pieces are experimental. I was trying different media, different techniques, different calligraphy. And in this one, what I did was I think I had learned this technique at some point, but I decided to try it here. I had wet ink on the paper before I did the writing, and I dropped kosher salt on top of the wet ink, and the salt reacted with the ink and created these starbursts, which were somewhat of a surprise to me. I did not expect this. Someone had said, "Oh, try salt," and I thought, well, who knows? So with that result, I wrote in these rather large gold letters, which are, I think, quite legible, and again, in the memory of the students from this school. And I think what was happening when I got down to this point, I was running out of space, so I finished it a little bit smaller, but you can still see exterminated in the death camps. So I think this is also an interesting effect. One more I'd like to tell you about. I won't be describing my technique for every piece, but I think just this one more, which is the only time I did this, which is what I did was I worked on a large sheet, a single sheet here, of an Asian paper. I think it was an Indian or Nepalese paper that surprisingly, I didn't know how it was going to work, but it absorbed the ink. And as soon as I started writing, I realized it was bleeding, meaning that the ink bled into the paper. The ink was absorbed by the paper. So I kept going just to see what would happen. And because I was writing quite large, these are big sheets of paper. This is about 20 inches by 14 inches, each piece. And when I finished the first page, I was in the middle of a sentence. It says here, this actually says victims, innocent victims of the, and I continued, Nazi barbarity. And here again, with the complicity of the government of Vichy. But I kept this not because it's very readable, but because I feel that the words that come out are important. You can see a la memoire, you can see 1942, 1944, you can see Nazi barbarity. And the black bleeding into the paper worked very well for me. I have to say, I never did this again. This is the only piece I did like this. To continue, this is another story, another individual plaque, like the one at the girls' fashion school. That was a one-off. A lot of the plaques are repeated, the ones that say, remember the children from this district. This one was from this school, from one school called the Lucien de Hirsch Primary and Secondary School. And what that plaque says is, the 24th of July, 1944, 1 month before the liberation of Paris, 71 children and 11 teachers were arrested and deported by the German police, assassinated at Auschwitz-Birkenau. And I made this is a large piece of calligraphy, very straightforward, Gothic lettering, except just for the attribution here at the bottom. And what I want you to see is that I did this piece in 2013. 3 years later, I came back to the same text and I did something entirely different with it. At that time, I had started working with this medium that is the background, which is oil pastel. And for those of you who aren't familiar with some of the materials, oil pastel are like crayons, only they're very creamy, very bright colors, very intense colors, and you can blend them into each other more than, children's crayons. So I rewrote that same text and I made the words, the top word, souviens-toi, which you see here over here as well, which means you remember or you must remember. It's implied, you must remember. And then the story again, here are the 71 children arrested, 11 teachers, masters, teachers, deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau. One more that is from a particular school. This is from an elementary school that it was in the 9th district, and this is for the children from that school. And this one says, this is a little different text. It says, in memory of 12,000 children, Jewish children, deported from France, 1942 to 44. And this says, arrested in their schools, in their homes, and on the street, taken from the street and from the schools, dead or killed at Auschwitz or elsewhere. And the last part means let their sacrifice remain alive for everyone and forever. I find this a very, very moving text. And I did this one, as you can see, very simply, just using black. Quite the opposite is this one, which you might recognize from the very first image. This is the painting that I used as the cover of my book, which is called Paris Auschwitz, Remembering the Children, which you saw as the cover of our lecture. That's the first page of our lecture. And on this one, this is the first piece I did on a piece of black paper. And I worked with, there's also another first here. I worked with gold calligraphy using a style that I had not used up till this point. I think I did this in 2015 or 16. This is called copperplate calligraphy that I'm sure everybody here is familiar with because it's on wedding invitations and bar mitzvahs, etc. It's very decorative. It's very kind of feminine and lyrical, and I wasn't using it. I chose not to use it for this project. And when I got to this painting, I thought I would try it as a contrast with the red Gothic letters, and I believe it works. I think it works on this piece. You'll see a little bit later, I'll show you a few more pieces where I also used a copperplate, but I tend to use it for the secondary writing, not the primary writing, as you'll see momentarily. This gold on top of it is actually the same paint that I wrote with, but I added it afterwards with a wet sponge. And one more large piece that I did, again, with oil pastels and layers of writing with the background in large letters that are not disappearing, but not prominent. But I think that they make you stop to read it. You can see a la memoire, you can see déporté, and then you can read pretty easily, if you speak French, of course, the text. And this one is for the little children from a preschool. So at this point, something happened, and that is I met this man. This is someone named Paul Eichenrand. Paul is a Holocaust survivor whom I met in 2014, and he is one of the founders of the Association for the Memory of the Deported Children in the 20th district. He is perhaps personally responsible for the installation of the very first memorial plaque. And at this time in the around 2014, I was meeting some Holocaust survivors, of whom there are not so many left anymore, but I met some in Paris, and someone introduced me to Paul, who took me into a school building. Now, this is something that ordinarily I, as not a parent of a student, I can't just walk into a school, but Paul, having worked with the schools on this memory project, this a la memoire project, he had access to the interior of the school. And I'm going to show you what this plaque is. I'll make this bigger so you can see. Each of these schools that was open during the Holocaust, that was built, let's say, before the Holocaust, I shouldn't say each because I'm not entirely sure. Many schools have plaques in their lobbies, and those plaques remember the individual children who went to that school. And this is, again, this was another shock to me, a turning point in my development of this project. This says, I'm going to translate one more for you. Arrested by the police of the government of Vichy in complicity with the Nazi occupation, more than 11,000 children were deported from France from 1942 to 1944 and assassinated at Auschwitz because they were born Jews or born Jewish. More than 140 of these children lived in the second district and were students that went to this primary school. Now, the names of these children these were the children who went to this primary school when they were little kids. So this is the age when they were deported, but the schools had records and they knew that Tatiana Bukowska was deported not from the maternelle, but probably from her high school at 16, Suzanne at 14, Denise at 7, etc. So to me, this was very moving and very shocking. And Paul showed me another one, same text. And this was a school where more children are being memorialized inside the school. Rose, who was 8 years old, Lucy, 13 years old, Margot, 5 years old. So some of them, perhaps she was still in the preschool. Oh, in fact, this was an elementary school, not a preschool. So she was probably in the first year of elementary school when she was deported. So Paul showed me these and I started to make new work. And one of the pieces is this. This is the text that I just translated, arrested by the police of the Vichy government. And here are the names. Let's look back momentarily. Paul, 16 years old, Malka, 16 years old, Bernard, 13 years old. And here they are on my painting, Paul, Malka, Bernard, and others. Paulette, 16, Gilbert, 16. I think I didn't get all the names on this page, but I got the effect of it. So these were from this elementary school. Now, Paul also opened my eyes to something else. He was quite an influence on me, Paul. He took me into the streets of Paris, where he explained to me that there were monuments outdoors that were specifically for small children who were deported and died in the camps, who were too young to attend school. And the Association for the Memory of the Children, the deported children, in cooperation with the government of Paris, erected monuments in parks and gardens throughout Paris. This one, I'm showing you this one because it's at the Church of Saint-Germain-des-Prés, which is one of the most famous old churches in Paris. And in their garden, they have a memorial to 6 little kids. Here's one who was 8 months old, one who was 6 years old, 3 years old, too young to go to school. In the 20th arrondissement, there were more. So what does this plaque say? It has the same heading that I've translated several times. And then it says, more than 1,000 of these children lived in the 20th arrondissement. Among them, 133. Now, this is the word tout petit, which means very small children, never had the time to go to school. They were too young to attend school. And this is the line that I can't read without being getting chilled. It says, passerby, read their name. Your memory is their only monument. And then here are 133 names of little babies. Charles was 1 year old, Regine, 1 year old, Danielle, 19 days old. Yvette, 10 months old. These were the children from that district who never returned from Auschwitz. So once again, this made a change for me in my work. Originally, I was looking at numbers. I was looking at things like 1,200 children from the 11th district, 1,000 children, it says here, right? 1,000 from the 20th, 700 from the 18th. But then I started to read the names, and there are plaques like this, not plaques, monuments in every district of Paris with thousands of names, 2,000 children who were under the age of 6 who were killed in the camps. So I started working on another series, and I'll show you a few of those pieces. This is one more of the same. This is from a different district, and here is one of the paintings that I did. And this, I took some of the words off the monument, not the entire text. Arrested by the police, by the French police from Vichy, deported from France, 1942, assassinated at Auschwitz. And here are names and ages. Jacques, 4 years old. Jacqueline, 10 months. Charlotte, 4 years old. Jean-Charles, 2 years old, etc. And at the bottom, which I covered with that oil pastel that I often do on top of my calligraphy, ne les oublions jamais. Never forget them. I use the same text, slightly different format, a little bit bigger writing on this one with a different background where I'm going from dark to light, which perhaps it should be the opposite direction. Maybe it should be from light to dark, but this color in the background is, again, it's oil pastel, which creates a special texture of its own, and the names. Georges, 3 years old. Regine, 1 year old. Elie, 4 months old. And again, deported, assassinated at Auschwitz. And 131, you can see tout petit, little children. These were the first 2 I did from that series. And here I came back to copperplate, which I mentioned I used in some of my work subsequent to the piece on black. And this is, again, the same text, but I did it a little bit more decoratively, I would say, and I put the names on the bottom and their ages. So this one was 500 children from the 3rd district, of whom 87, that's an 8, 87 were very small children. These are all 3. This and the previous 2 are large pieces because I had a lot I needed to write on them. Here, this is actually a preliminary to another piece with children's names. On this one, this is working on black, just like the piece I just mentioned. On this, I was trying to work with metallic paints. And again, it's the same text, arrested by the police of the government of Vichy. And again, this one is from the 5th district of Paris. And I did all the subsidiary text in the copperplate. But here, let's see if I can make this bigger. You can see at the bottom, this is very important. Passerby, read their name. Your memory is their only memorial or their only monument. This word doesn't translate exactly, but the general translation is their monument, like their gravestone. And on the next piece, which is also on black and also using a red metallic and the yellow gold, I put in some names. So it's the same text, a little bit different layout. And here are some names: Marcel, 5 years old; Eliane, 3 years old; Michelle, 4 years old. I felt that I can honor the memory of these children by writing their names, just as I think in some of the memorials every year, the Holocaust memorials, they read the names of the dead, the deported and the dead. So I am writing their names. And on this one, I worked again with metallics. I find that these are recent pieces, I think 2021 or 2022. I find that this metallic blue bleeding into a black sky here with the stars and the sky, I think is a very demanding kind of background. And again, I use the word demanding because I feel that people have to look, they have to read the words. And in some cases, using certain colors and certain well, I would say images, but it's calligraphic images, can make people stop and read in a way that typography perhaps does not. And this one is more Gothic, using some gold. I put a fair amount of gold on this, again, to make it stand out. 12 million children deported from France. I'd like to just show you a couple where I emphasized the use of the oil pastels and made the writing a little bit of a background, although I think that the bottom part here is very readable. It says, this is also a different text because it says, arrested in 1943 and 1944 by the Vichy police and the Gestapo. And this was from a school called the École de Travail, which means the work school. This was a vocational school, and the location, those of you who know Paris might recognize this, the Rue des Rosiers, which is considered sort of the main street in one of the Jewish districts in Paris. That's where a lot of Jewish shops and restaurants are today. In fact, I bought my Hanukkah candles on the Rue des Rosiers. That's where they sell them. So this piece and the next one, I wanted to use the oil pastels. And on this, I feel that there's a conflict, which I wanted, between the large, bold, black writing and what I'm covering it with. I wrote on top of it with silver and gray and black, and the red is behind it. And this, again, is just some words chosen, not the whole text. But at this point, I'm sure you know what all these words mean. 11,000 children deported from France by the Nazis with, now this is participation, with the participation of the Vichy government. Just a few more, and then I will end. This one, I'm just showing you because as it gets bigger, I think it gets more intense because of all the layering of the gold paint and gold oil pastel, and the writing is in gold and red paint. And this is, again, 11,000 children deported from France and assassinated at Auschwitz. I'm showing, or I would say I'm choosing this among some of the more recent work because I started using brighter colors and working toward getting light. I want light to come out of the work so that it has, I want it to feel like it's lit from within. And this piece, the text on this piece, has to do with another a terrible chapter in Holocaust history, which I'll show you the next piece because you can read it more clearly. This says Vel Div. This is the Velodrome d'Hiver, and this is a story or a chapter in history that I'm sure will be familiar to so many of you. In 1942, on the 16th of July, 1942, the French police and under the German occupation rounded up 7,000 Jews from Paris in one day, 7,000 Jews, including 4,000 children, and brought them to the Velodrome, which was a bicycle stadium. It was called the Velodrome d'Hiver. D'Hiver is winter, so it was like the winter. That was the name of it, the Winter Stadium. So it was a bike stadium where they locked in 7,000 people without food, without water, without sanitation for 5 days, at the end of which they were deported to Auschwitz. And I think almost nobody returned from this particular roundup. So this is the same story. This one I highlighted with gold, incarcerated, so locked up, transferred to the Velodrome d'Hiver, deported to the extermination camps, the Nazi extermination camps. And this was in memory of the Jewish children from the 3rd district. In fact, that speech that I mentioned earlier by Jacques Chirac, by the president, apologizing for Vichy and for the French government and for the French police, he gave that address on the 16th of July, 1995, on the 53rd anniversary of this roundup, the Velodrome d'Hiver. Just another fact. And here's another one where I'm using the same text about the Velodrome d'Hiver, using it with gold and bronze writing. This is quite recent. I did this not that long ago and did another one using the same media. A little bit less readable, but I think it's an important text in memory of the Jewish children deported, once again deported and executed. So at this point, I would just like to read one more short text from Elie Wiesel. And this is from his book Night, which is his Holocaust memoir. This is what he wrote. I believe in man in spite of man. I believe in language, even though it has been wounded, deformed, and perverted by the enemies of mankind. And I continue to cling to words because it is up to us to transform them into instruments of comprehension rather than contempt. It is up to us to choose whether we wish to use them to curse or to heal, to wound or to console. So I would like to end my talk to you with one more piece of calligraphy, which is a quote from Anne Frank. This is not exactly part of the A la Memoire series, but I did this one year in commemoration of the Holocaust. Look at how a single candle can both defy and define the darkness. Thank you. Thank you all. I'm going to stop the screen share.
Well, that was lovely. Very just touching and eloquent, taking us through the different periods and the different things that happened in Paris. So with that, I want to take any questions that anybody may have. If you want to put them in the chat, um, I can take them at that point in time. If anybody has any questions for Eleanor. While people are thinking, I mean, I can start by the first one is, what is your relationship? Do you have a personal relationship to the Holocaust? And what was your interest in the Holocaust to do so much art around the Holocaust?
Oh, thank you. That's a great question. I grew up in Brooklyn, and I was my parents and grandparents were not in Europe during the Holocaust. My grandparents came over from Eastern Europe from their own pogroms in the end of the 19th century, but no one in my family was personally affected. However, I grew up with other children whose parents or grandparents had the numbers on their arm. And one of my best friends was the child of a Holocaust survivors who were in the Warsaw Ghetto. And I heard their stories over and over again. So the stories of Europe, the stories of Poland, the stories of Auschwitz were part of my childhood and my young adulthood. And I'm Jewish, I was going to say, of course, but I'm Jewish. And when I started to live in Paris, I mentioned this earlier in my talk, these plaques were stunning to me. My French at the time was good enough. It's better now, but it was good enough to understand what I was reading, and after reading them, and after I did some of the artwork, I started studying more. And as I mentioned earlier, I started to meet some people. This man, I'll tell you briefly, Paul, whom I mentioned at length, he was one of what were called the enfants cachés, which means the hidden children. His parents in 1942 or 43, probably earlier, sent him to the countryside of France where he lived hidden, where his Judaism was hidden. Like many French Jewish children, he lived on a farm during the war years and survived because of the great kindness of non-Jewish people who took in children and told stories to their neighbors that these were their cousins or friends who were staying for a visit. And the children survived, the parents did not. So my involvement has grown and grown and grown over the years.
Thank you. Somebody wants to know if you sell your work.
Once in a while, I do. When I say once in a while, for the first 7 or 8 or 9 years, I wouldn't, because I felt that it was a body of work and it needed to remain together. And then it got bigger and bigger. And I think I now have 250 or so paintings. So at this point, once in a while, someone comes to me and I am, more than happy to sell the work. If anyone wants to know more, I think Marianne can provide my email address if anyone wants to contact me about that.
Well, on that note, why don't you tell us about the book? Because I think that all goes kind of together in terms of, because that shows more of your work in a book form. So why don't you talk a little bit more about your recent book and how to get that, or any other books that you
Sure.
might have for sale and
Okay.
how to get them?
Well, here is the book, which Marianne and I discussed this just before the lecture. That's why I just happened to have it right here. And this is recognizable, perhaps, because that was our first image in this lecture. This is a collection of 40 of the paintings in a hardcover book that was published 3 years ago. And I'll just open to a page to give you an idea of what the format looks like. So here, this is a page that you can recognize from the lecture. So the book is it's fairly simple. A plan. Each painting in the book has on the facing page the text in French and the translation in English. And there is also some introductory material, part of which I wrote and part of which I had some other historians write for me, one in French and one in English. So the book is available from me. It's not being sold on Amazon. So I have it's been in a couple of bookstores in Paris, and I've sold it at exhibitions. So I've also made it available. If people want to buy the book, they can again contact me through email. And I can tell you right now that it's $35, which is very little for a hardcover book, plus the shipping. So write to me and I'll tell you more if you'd like to know. My other books are all calligraphy books. I wrote 6, basically how-to books on different styles of calligraphy. And you could look them up. I'm not selling those. Those are all, I think 2 of them are published by Dover, 2 are published by Sterling Publishing, and 2 others that elude me at the moment, but they're all available on Amazon. And just put my name in and you'll see all my books. And they're all actually still in print, which is very nice for me. But this is the one that most recent. The A la Memoire book is the most recent, and it's the only one that is absolutely an art book. The others are, I think they're very nice, but they're textbooks, how to do calligraphy.
Thank you. I just want to let everybody know that in the chat, I just put Eleanor's email, which is the first one, and then also her website. The other thing, just as Eleanor just said, Eleanor Winters, calligraphist, if you put that in, you will also find a lot of information on Eleanor and her work. So, well, I have many more questions, but I think that there's no more questions. One of the participants did say thank you very much. It was very impactful. And so I just want to say thank you very much for speaking with us today and sharing. I think, not only your work, but also your personal insights. One question I do have, since you are in France and knowing what's going on in the world today, as a Jewish person, how do you feel living in France right now?
That's a tough question. And I have to say that my circle of friends, the people I'm in contact with, are all right thinking, not as in right wing, but as in, the opposite of anti-Semitic. And we talk about Israel, we talk about the war, we talk about anti-Semitism, and everyone is in agreement that the world is in trouble. And I don't think this is by any means just France. So do I go out and see swastikas on the wall? No. Do I see synagogues being defaced? No. I do see police in front of synagogues, but I have seen police in front of synagogues for many years, and in France. And there was a very big demonstration a couple of weeks ago, anti-Semitism, that Macron he led the march, hundreds of thousands of people. So there's bad and there's good everywhere. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, people ask me this question, and, it's like answering, and I'm not saying this to be provocative, but it's like answering the question that the French people say to me, which is, how can you live in America where they don't have gun laws? where you have
Interesting.
mass shootings. And I'm, it's a hard one.
It's
So
interesting.
I wish the world
It's
were better.
well, I think it's also perspective. I think it's interesting, it's an interesting question right back at you.
It certainly is. And, not to take undue credit, but I feel that by making this artwork and showing the artwork, exhibiting the artwork, I'm speaking out, which is about as much as I can do. I mean, joining a
Sure,
march
sure.
with 100,000 other people is not as much of a statement for me as continuing to make this art. I do have another show coming up next year in New Jersey. If any of you are available, you could ask me about that. It's at in Newark, New Jersey, at the New Jersey Jewish Museum. So
Very
that's the
nice.
next thing that I'm preparing for.
Well, Eleanor, I will say thank you very much. Thank you for everybody for joining us.